So welcome everybody to the second edition of the MedTech20. Today's guest is Daniel Wachter. Daniel was the VP Global Sales and Marketing for Bemis Healthcare. He led his team through the transition and acquisition by Amcor, so some really interesting experience to talk about there. And currently he's just taken on a new role with a company called CTI, and we'll go into a little bit about what that organization does. They've got some really innovative technology that's applicable in the pharma, medtech, and also the food and beverage space. So we're going to talk through what his role is going to be at CTI as the Chief Commercial Officer, and lots of other interesting topics. So let's get into this. So welcome, Daniel. Really happy to have you on the second edition of the MedTech 20. And, I think the last time you and I spoke, you were making the transition to CTI. And I think most recently you've just moved to Colorado. So how are things in Colorado today?
Well, it's a beautiful Friday morning, last working day for the week, so I'm looking forward to the weekend. But everything is very fine in Colorado Springs. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me for the conversation, Gordon. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome, Daniel, and real pleasure to have you on. So, I thought where we would start today is just to rewind a little bit further back into your career. You did spend a number of years, I think 21 in total, with an organization called Storopac. So maybe we could start there, and you could tell us a little bit about your history with Storopac, and maybe a little bit about Storopac as an organization.
Sure, happy to do so. So indeed, I've started my career with Storopac, ended up working for Storopac for 21 years. Storopac is a family-owned company headquartered close to Stuttgart, and it's actually in protective packaging in two divisions, molding as well as flexible protective packaging. Maybe most of the people might know Storopac. They buy from Amazon. They get the packages with the air pillows. So that's one of those flexible protective packaging products. So I had the opportunity to run my first business, or Storopac's business, in the Benelux, which was the first time that I had the opportunity to run a business, which was a turnaround mission at that time, which I got accomplished together with the team. That was from 2005 to end of 2010. During the time, made my executive MBA program, got the opportunity then to move my family to the United States, to Cincinnati, Ohio, for Storopac. Storopac is headquartered in the North American market over there. Yeah, we started with a plan to be there for 2 or 3 years, and that's about 9 years ago. So obviously plans have changed. First of all, within Storopac, I got offered to become president of Storopac North America, which was kind of my second turnaround mission, which also I got accomplished with the team. But end of 2017, I decided for a change. I had been with the company for 21 years, had kind of reached the ceiling organizationally, probably because of working and living in the United States, developed a desire to have skin in the game. That means gain participation in equity. And so I left the company end of 2017 and thought I'd take a quick of a halftime break. If I use the sports analogy, was 21 years. It kind of felt like it was the first halftime of my professional career. Let's take a 15 minutes break before we run into the second half.
That's a long half as well.
My 15 minutes halftime break actually was, I thought I'd do some consulting at first while I explore what is the next right step to be done. I took my opportunities to leverage my industry expertise in protective packaging and offer my services to various private equity firms that were looking at that time to invest into protective packaging. And that was an interesting experience to me, first time working with private equity, advising and consulting them. And that was kind of my halftime break activity while I was figuring out what was that next step that I wanted to do. And one of various options was Bemis Healthcare Packaging. So ultimately, I took the decision in May 2018 to join Bemis Healthcare Packaging as their Vice President Global Sales and Marketing, which was for me a super exciting step. First of all, moving from secondary packaging into primary packaging, moving into a highly technical packaging environment, in obviously providing packaging for medical devices, for pharma, with all the regulatory aspects, all the technology aspects that were very intriguing to me. And ultimately what was intriguing to me having been lived in different countries, speaking different language, was the global approach of the role. So I joined healthcare packaging, which was a wonderful move, although one that really changed pretty quickly. 3 months later, only the merger with Amcor was announced, and it did not turn out bad at all. It was just a very, very different spin pretty quickly also to my role. In addition to continuing to lead the teams towards profitable growth, it was about to start to prepare for the merger as far as it was possible, being a competitor. And ultimately, the merger closed in June 2019. And I was offered to stay after the merger. My role, however, changed. So from that global aspect of leading both sales and marketing, I was offered to stay on board as the vice president sales for the combined healthcare packaging activity in North America, which was a step I really enjoyed as well, because it really gave me the opportunity to not only commercially prepare the businesses to merge, but also then to really drive the commercial integration of a sizable business in North America. So that was really fun. However, decided end of January to leave Amcor. My role had changed. So before it was a very global role, and now it was, let's say, kind of North America only, and there was nothing bad about it, but I was missing the international scope, the global scope of that. I decided to leave and to make a very different move probably than the one that I've made with Bemis Amcor. So I joined a smaller business called Chromatic Technologies Incorporated in Colorado Springs as its chief commercial officer. And what really intrigued me was the opportunity to scale that business profitably globally.
Right, okay. So just before we move on to talk a little bit more about CTI, maybe we could just explore a little bit further the Bemis and Amcor piece. Obviously came into that position not knowing that there was going to be this acquisition happening. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about your experience of leading a global team at a healthcare packaging business of that size, and what were some of the opportunities and challenges that came along with that?
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, first of all, yes, it was a surprise. However, in Germany we have that saying: if there is smoke somewhere, there must be a fire as well. So, I mean, I made my due diligence when deciding to join Bemis, and there were rumors out there, but I'm not a rumor chaser. Life is too valuable and time is too valuable to chase rumors. So I try to be a very business rational person. So that's how I approached it. And Bemis and Amcor at the time, very large companies already, 9 and 4 billion. It took a lot of different regulatories all over the world for months and months and months to approve. So there was not really an immediate change at all, other than knowing that there might be that day somewhere in the near or a little bit further future where us being competitors will switch overnight of being one company.
Right.
And I mean, what it does psychologically, and I think that was certainly the leadership challenge for all of us on both sides. I've learned that then after the merger, same challenges on the Amcor side. The leadership challenges were indeed to not to keep focused first on customers, to keep focused on the business, because there was at first no change.
Right.
I mean, yes, we got all calls from customers from all over the world the day after the announcement. When is the name going to change? How is it going to be? How to details like, do article numbers change, especially in a highly regulated environment? And I mean, so we were busy as of next day with some of those questions, but nothing really changed at first in detail. But it is the imagination, together with concerns, together with the uncertainties, that turned out to be indeed a leadership challenge. And that was, in that respect, a very, very interesting experience to continue to keep teams focused to serve our customers, to focus on what we had to get accomplished in 2018, make a plan and a budget for 2019, so that the year when this merger should happen. That brought a very interesting dynamic. So what do we plan for? There are so many things that we know will change. We just don't know yet how. So that was a very interesting dynamics in the business planning perspective. But I was impressed and give big credit to a lot of people how seamless on June 11th, 2019, in the morning, that switch indeed worked, from switching being competitors in the evening to become colleagues in the morning. I mean, there's always some of those tensions that continue, and there were probably more questions not answered yet on June 11th than they were answered. So the whole integration then took a while. The global character of the business. I mean, again, it's all public information. The European Commission, for example, mandated BMIS, so mandated us to divest the packaging business in Europe.
Yeah.
And that brought a significant layer of complexity with global customers because we were serving them in North America, we were serving them in Europe, we were serving them in Asia Pacific, and all of a sudden the question came up. So if you're mandated now to spin off and sell and divest the European activity, I mean, how does that impact our global relationship, the supply chains, and so on? So again, it was really an interesting mix of focusing on existing business, dealing with some of those mandates that came along to even divest some business in preparation for a merger that is still to come, while preparing for that, and everyone really desperately waiting for that day to finally come, so that we have certainty or develop that certainty together and how things will move forward. So very exciting and interesting.
Good, good. So let's talk a little bit on CTI now, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the history, why it was an exciting opportunity for you to join. Maybe you can share a little bit about the technology and how you intend to scale that business up.
So you asked a lot of questions in one question.
I
So
did.
I'll try to work through that. So
That was a
let me
rough
know
one.
if I missed anything. But indeed, it's indeed a big transition. And why a big transition or a big difference is that obviously, if I compare this role to BMS MCore, I kind of left corporate America and decided again to go into a privately held business environment, working with and for the founder and the owner of that business. So obviously very different from an ownership perspective, which comes along, I think, with a very big difference in terms of the entrepreneurial drive. From a technology perspective, I have to admit I'm a business administration guy. I'm not an engineer. I always need smart engineers to get things done. So I could get easily impressed with technology because I'm not an engineer myself. However, I've really learned about the uniqueness of the technology that the owner, the founder, and his team have really developed, and it is indeed unique. It's well protected, and they have been able to generate a sizable business, especially in beverage and in food. And this is where I see a lot of the, let's say, shorter to mid-term scalability of the business. And I'll quickly talk about what the technologies and the applications are. But you have hinted to pharma and medical devices as well. The really long-term scalability of this business is also in pharma and medical devices. So Chromatic Technologies Incorporated has developed temperature, light, and pressure-sensitive inks.
Right.
So the physical delivery to our customers who are printers, converters, so it's not packaging, it's the ink that goes on the packaging, whether it's flexible packaging, whether it's metal packaging. So the physical delivery ultimately is ink, and the technology which is in the ink makes the ink change its color because of temperature changes, because of UV light impact, or because of a change of pressure. So the most known and the most tangible application is Coors Light. So if you buy a can of Coors Light and put it into the fridge, that wonderful mountain that is printed on the can turns deep blue. And that indicates that the beer is cold. So we are a part of Coors brand messaging of the cold Rocky Mountains, a cold beer, and the cold activation of our color is a huge part of their brand messaging. So in that respect, CTI, if I describe it probably in one sentence, is an R&D driven company that provides chemistry, for example, in the form of inks that protect, that alert, and that surprise.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how this technology could be applied in the medical device or pharmaceutical, or broadly speaking, the healthcare markets.
We have developed very relevant applications into pharma, for example. The World Health Organization, for example, has identified 16 vaccines that are freeze sensitive. And most of the medications, also like insulin, for example, are temperature sensitive. And we think that our technology that ultimately provides printable temperature sensors that can be put on each and any dose provide a value to indicate to doctors, to nurses, whether a medication like insulin, whether a vaccine either had been frozen or had been exposed to heat, which means that they are not effective or even not safe anymore to be used. And that's a unique value proposition. Today's solution provide those indications only for bulk on the package, but not per dose. We
Right.
think that this is a difference maker if you look in terms of the cold chain supply and its challenges and issues to make things not freeze and expose things not to high temperatures. So in that respect, with those printable sensors, we think that we can make a difference at the point of care.
Yeah,
I mean, we cannot prevent the vaccine, for example, to be too cold or too hot,
of
but we
course.
indicate at the point of care to the doctor, to the nurse, to the patient, whether it's still safe to use it. And we can do that per each and any dose. That's in short what CTI does, what the
Yeah,
technology is. It's an incredible technology included there.
yeah.
And we intend to further grow and scale the business in beverage, in food, and long term also in pharma, as well as medical devices. If you think of drug coated medical devices that are
Mm.
temperature sensitive, there are even applications in the medical devices.
And
So
so
again, does it answer your loaded question? There were a lot of components in there. Is there anything that you want to dig deeper?
I think you actually answered it all. So, um, one other question that I did have around the technology is, being that you're in food, beverage, and now looking at pharma and medical devices and medical technology. I mean, what are some of the regulatory considerations? Obviously, there are differences between food and medical devices or pharmaceuticals. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that piece.
That turns into a complete different and new dimension once you get into validation processes for vaccines. I mean, that's just stuff that we're working through right now.
Yeah.
And certainly the COVID crisis right now shows us a very unusual example of a fast forward validation process because more than 7 billion people wait for that vaccine
Mm.
to be available. So I think we're going to see significant acceleration for that to happen, which is so things that usually take 4 to 5 years may take place in half a year or
Yeah.
something like that. But again, it impacts the ink as well. So obviously we collaborate with our customers, we collaborate with regulatory bodies like the World Health Organization.
Mm.
And again, it's a complex matter and certainly a different level of complexity from a regulations perspective than it is in food.
Right, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, you've got a business with food and beverage right now that's fairly significant. You're looking to move into the medical technology, medical device, and pharmaceutical space. So, how do you figure out how to divide your time in terms of building out kind of a strategic growth plan for the organization as the chief commercial officer?
We have a universe of possibility that applies to so many different things, so we could easily get distracted. So
Right.
we will need to be very choiceful. But I certainly see ourselves to increase our share of wallet in the beverage space, clearly targeting specific subsegments. We see incredible growth opportunities in food. So we have developed new applications in retort, for example. We have developed applications for APP process
Mm.
where our ink does not really have a ink competitor, but the competition is the current process. But here is the value proposition: the possibility to print an indicator on a label that confirms that the HPP process was successful is a game changer in improved process cost. So if
Right.
you look at the HPP process from a total cost of ownership, we're basically breaking that process to make it simpler and very, very much more cost efficient. And another very big basket that I've probably already scratched on is pharma.
Yeah.
Vaccines, medications like insulin. Insulin, for example, should be stored below 8 degrees Celsius. But
Mm.
if you inject it at that temperature, it's really painful. So
Mm.
we have developed a safe inject application. That means there is a printed label, and the technology is in the ink, being the temperature sensor that shows when it is really stored at the right temperature.
Right.
But when you warm it up before you inject it, it already also indicates you when it has the right temperature to inject, so that it's not painful. So, and again, these are incredible applications where we are hopefully making a difference at the point of sale to not only alert the doctor or the nurse, but
Yeah.
also indicate the right information to the patients, whether it's safe to use, whether it has the right temperature to use, and so on. And on that side, we are still probably rather at the beginning. So I think shorter to midterm, the growth opportunities are going to be in beverage and in food.
Yeah.
But we're working full speed with respective partners to really start to scale into pharma. But you mentioned regulation already, Gordon. That's going to be the sales marathon. So from a
Yeah.
sales perspective, with the cycle, because of regulations, that will take time. And we will see whether we are able to use a catalyst of a COVID crisis to the good, to be able to offer our value to the vaccine that's hopefully going to be out available for a lot of people who wait for it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it could be a really useful application right now, and probably a really good time to be putting this into the market.
That's what we think. That's what we think, and that's kind of what we hope for. On the other hand, if it's not COVID, again, we know the temperature sensitivity of those. I've referenced 16 vaccines that have been identified by the WHO
Yeah.
to be freeze sensitive and so on. So there is application, and again, that's part of the strategic plan and the mid to long term growth, together with partners, together with pharma companies that we're talking, together with medical device companies that we're talking to for applications, where I think this is where the mid to long term scalability and growth opportunities of the business is.
Right, that makes sense. So, as we draw to a bit of a conclusion here, Daniel, I always like to explore a little bit about life outside of your professional life. And I know that you were a member of the board of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, and is that something that's still ongoing?
I'm still on the board, and I intend to stay on the board. It's
Okay.
interesting. The board meetings were always physical meetings, and through the pandemic, we have learned to have board meetings via Zoom. And guess what? They're probably not any less productive. The
Yeah.
downside, however, is I always enjoy to meet so many of the other board members, so the socializing aspect is
Right.
completely missing.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, from an effectiveness perspective, not any less productive. And I mean, that's encouraging me to stay productive as a board member, also on distance. And I mean, at the same time, however, and that's the interesting, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, never waste a good crisis,
Right.
is that it's super challenging, but at the same time, it indeed, in a
Yeah.
positive note, turns out to be a catalyst of incredible innovation.
So that wraps up episode 2 of the MedTech20 with Daniel Wachter. Hope you really enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. We certainly covered a variety of topics, and I'm sure Daniel would love to hear from you if you want to reach out to him via LinkedIn or by email. We will see you on the next one, and we'll look forward to talking with you again then.